This is VOA Africa.
Good evening, I'm Esther Githu. It's Tuesday, September 24th. This is Africa 54. United States President Donald Trump addresses world leaders at the United Nations. Again, he vows to protect America's borders and heavily criticizes a Middle East foe. Will a new memorandum of understanding improve relations between Uganda and Rwanda? And a Cameroonian pharmacist creates a device to detect fake drugs. We'll have more on U.S. President Donald Trump's UN address in a moment. But first, New York is the center of global power this week as world leaders gather for the United Nations General Assembly. Action on climate change was high on the agenda for many leaders as they met Monday for a climate action summit targeting ways to reduce carbon emissions. VOA's Saqib Ul-Islam has more from the United Nations.
Protesters have gathered in cities around the world in recent days to demand that leaders take more aggressive action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and halt the rise of carbon in atmosphere. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said his generation has failed in responsibility to protect the planet.
Our world's forests are on fire. As we meet today, thick smog is choking tens of thousands of hectares of forest in Indonesia. And fires are still raging in the Amazon, afflicting millions of acres of rainforest.
Video of Brazil's Amazon forest burning this year have raised concerns over the vulnerability of natural areas that pull carbon from atmosphere. Mayor Arthur Virgilio Neto, whose city, Manaus, lies in the middle of the blazes, called for action.
Main leaders in the world, if they don't take seriously this problem, we will have a planet that maybe will not worse to be inhabited by us. It will be unbearable. We cannot say yes to everything that comes from ideas of President Donald Trump. I think he is not understanding that his position is very bad for the future of humanity.
The president has cast doubt on global warming and said efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions will hurt American workers and damage the fossil fuel industry. Despite his opposition, climate analyst David Wasco of World Resource Institute says climate policies continue in the United States at the local level.
Well, I think in the United States itself, we're continuing to see quite substantial amount of action from cities, from states, and from business that, although it doesn't make up for what the federal government isn't doing, it can take us quite a ways and do a significant amount of good.
The Trump administration backed out of Paris Climate Agreement and rolled back scores of regulations over clean air and water in the United States. Despite those actions, Trump insisted last month at G7 summit that he continues to think of himself as an environmentalist.
And I think I know more about the environment than most people. I want clean air, I want clean water, I want a wealthy country, I want a spectacular country with jobs, with pensions, with so many things.
Other countries that rely on fossil fuel for critical electricity needs are also speaking at the summit. India, Indonesia, and China all are building more coal plants to meet their rapidly rising energy needs. David Wasco says there is still time for countries to take concrete action, but the window is closing.
2020 is the time when countries need to come forward with stronger commitments under the Paris Agreement, and they also have an opportunity to come forward with strategies for 2050, how we're going to get on a zero emissions pathway.
We're here as citizens of the planet.
Climate activists hope that they can convince governments to move faster to reduce carbon emissions and vow that they will keep protesting to keep the pressure on. At the United Nations, Saqib Ul-Islam, VOA News.
U.S. President Donald Trump addressed world leaders Tuesday during the 74th United Nations General Assembly. In his speech, the president again vowed to protect America's borders, embrace nationalism, and reject globalism. But he also chastised allies across the Atlantic for not adequately funding their fair share of European defense.
As we rebuild the unrivaled might of the American military, we are also revitalizing our alliances by making it very clear that all of our partners are expected to pay their fair share of the tremendous defense burden which the United States has borne in the past.
President Trump also talked tough on Iran, accusing the Middle East nation of being a promoter of state-sponsored terrorism. Tehran has been widely blamed for the recent attacks in Saudi Arabia, although Iran denies any involvement. The president says if Iran's aggressive behavior continues, sanctions will be tightened. Let's listen to Trump on Iran.
One of the greatest security threats facing peace-loving nations today is the repressive regime in Iran. The regime's record of death and destruction is well known to us all. Not only is Iran the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism, but Iran's leaders are fueling the tragic wars in both Syria and Yemen. At the same time, the regime is squandering the nation's wealth and future in a fanatical quest for nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them. We must never allow this to happen.
To discuss President Trump's UN address, VOA's Margaret Bashir joins me live from the United Nations. Hello, Margaret.
Hi, Esther.
Hi. Somewhat of a conciliatory tone from the president there during his speech, but once again, he had very strong words for several nations, especially Iran.
Yes, I think he delivered warnings both to political and economic adversaries. He also spoke about the strength of the U.S. military, but he said that the U.S. doesn't want conflict with anyone, but at the same time, he will defend America's interests. So there was a variety of messages there. But he also said, in terms of Iran, he made the point that some of America's greatest enemies in the past are now some of its closest allies, and so that adversaries don't necessarily need to be forever. And if you look back in history, I mean, the United States was at war with Germany and Japan half a century ago, and now they're two of our closest allies. So things can change. And here in New York, while there were hopes this week that perhaps President Trump and Iranian President Hassan Rouhani might have some sort of an encounter on the sidelines of the General Assembly, those sort of faded after the September 14th attack on the Saudi oil facilities, for which the United States has blamed Iran, and Iran denies having conducted those attacks. But there's still some diplomatic efforts going on behind the scenes here. Last night, the French President Emmanuel Macron met with the Iranian leader. I believe Mr. Macron will meet with Mr. Trump later today or tomorrow. And there are reports that the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, who is here in New York, will also have separate meetings with Trump and Rouhani. So perhaps they can be intermediaries. Those two countries are also parties to the Iran nuclear deal, and they very much want to see it stay alive.
Margaret, again, the president was very tough on his stance on immigration.
Yes, I think, it's an election period now in the United States. The campaigning for 2020 has begun. So there were messages in this speech to his domestic audience as well. And one of those was one of his pillars, which is on undocumented migration. And he said, we will protect the borders. And he made a clear message. I mean, he said, I'm speaking to those of you considering coming to the United States. Don't do it. And he said, we will not allow you in, and we will promptly send you back. So he was quite clear on that, and he thanked the Mexican president for sending 27,000 Mexican troops to the U.S.'s southern border to deter migrants from trying to cross into the U.S.
Margaret, excellent reporting. Our thanks to VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bashir. Now, hundreds of activists blocked major intersections across the United States Capitol Monday, demanding immediate government action on climate change. As Veronica Balderas Iglesias reports, the Washington protesters used sailboats, vans, cars, ladders, and sit-ins to block key intersections around the city.
No traffic on a Monday morning in the U.S. Capitol? That's exactly what a broad coalition of activist groups aim for to deliver a strong message against global warming.
We have tried the rallies, we have tried the demonstrations, we have done the letter writing campaigns, we have talked with our senators and our representatives, and we are not seeing enough action, so we are shutting down D.C. so they see how serious we are.
Washington Metropolitan Police kept a close eye on the protesters, some of whom used different objects, including sailboats, to draw attention to their cause. There were no reports of injuries or significant damage, but more than a dozen arrests were made. That didn't deter the activists from calling on U.S. politicians to do more to fight climate change.
Especially for Black Lives Matter, we have a duty to remind folks that there are people, Black people here in D.C. that are suffering from the effects of both climate change and environmental racism every day, and that people are losing people and people are dealing with severe illness and disease every day.
Commuters in the nation's capital had mixed reactions to the protest.
My opinion on it isn't quite as strong as some others. Like I said, I feel that we do have an impact on it. What our impact really is, I don't know. Some action is required. I do think that we need to clean things up. It is upsetting with the pollution in the oceans and stuff like that. It would be nice to see some stuff done, but protesting.
Well, I think it's important, but I think it's a better way to go about it. But, you know, everybody has a right to express their own opinions. So.
The protests in Washington coincided with the start of the UN Climate Summit in New York, which will be attended by leaders from some 60 countries. Veronica Balderas Iglesias for VOA News, Washington, D.C.
Tensions between Rwanda and Uganda are on the rise, with Rwanda accusing its neighbor of hosting terrorist groups and torturing Rwandan nationals. The countries signed a memorandum of understanding in August to improve relations, but observers are skeptical the agreement will improve things. Here is Eugene Uwimana in Kigali.
The memorandum of understanding signed between Rwanda and Uganda in Luanda last month likely will fall to the wayside, considering the past bilateral agreements between the neighboring countries have ended in vain. That's according to human rights and political experts like Gatete Thierry.
But these MOUs are pieces of paper if people don't have the will to implement what is in those pieces of paper.
Since February, Rwanda has prevented its nationals from entering Uganda, severely affecting business in both countries.
Things have changed. We are witnessing losses. Business is not like it was before closing the borders.
On September 16th, Kigali hosted an ad hoc meeting designed to restart talks aimed at reducing tension. The Rwandan government says bilateral historical bonds should be a remedy.
Rwanda and Uganda, as Minister Kutesa said, share historical ties that should normally build a strong strategic alliance, given the long-standing bonds linking the two peoples and countries.
Uganda accuses Rwanda of planting spies in the country, although it has not stated for what purpose. Kigali alleges, among other things, that Rwandans have been illegally detained or tortured on Ugandan soil, and that Uganda is harboring terror groups working to destabilize Rwanda's government. The Ugandan government says it will give Rwandans due process and isn't interested in destabilizing Rwanda's security.
The point is that we have nothing to benefit in destabilizing Rwanda, just like I think they have nothing to benefit by destabilizing Uganda.
Despite the progress, though, observers say for now nothing has changed or improved and are taking a wait-and-see approach. Eugene Uwimana for VOA News, Kigali, Rwanda.
You're watching Africa 54. We'll be right back.
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African Beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
I am Shaka Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
I'm Clara Frank, and here's what's trending. Entertainer Jennifer Lopez closed the Versace show at Milan Fashion Week in a recreation of the plunging jungle-themed gown she wore to the Grammy Awards nearly 20 years ago. She modeled a newer version of the green dress, which at the time made headlines for its revealing low-cut front and skirt slits and helped inspire the creation of Google images. The show marked the 20th anniversary of Versace's jungle print, with models wearing tops, skirts, suits, and dresses in its vivid green hues. Next up, Italian fashion house Dolce & Gabbana also took fashionistas on a jungle trek, presenting a spring wardrobe inspired by colorful tropical fauna and flora. The Spring-Summer 2020 women's wear line featured beige and khaki shirts, cropped cargo trousers, dresses and shorts worn with leopard print bikini or corset tops. There were also designs adorned in fruit prints, including pineapples on bikini tops, dresses, and skirts, sometimes mixed with colorful polka dots. And finally, high heels aren't going to go down without a fight. While some fashionistas are ditching their stilettos in favor of sneakers or flats, others insist the extra height and flattering lines are worth the pain. Designers were split on the trend to ditch high heels. Kate Spade, Tory Burch, and Michael Kors all embraced flat shoes for the season, with other designers admitting they were interested in hopping on the high-end sneaker trend. And that's what's trending today.
With football's World Cup Championship in Qatar just over 3 years away, many migrant workers building the venues are still struggling to get paid, and in some cases are returning home without receiving any wages after months or years of work, according to Amnesty International. The human rights group is calling on FIFA and the international community to put more pressure on Qatar to make meaningful reforms ahead of the 2022 World Cup. Henry Ridgwell reports.
The country's successful bid to host the 2022 World Cup is drawing attention to the plight of migrant workers. Many of them are now involved in building stadiums and infrastructure. There were widespread complaints of unpaid wages, dire living conditions and dangerous construction sites. Following global criticism, the government agreed to an overhaul of migrant rights in 2018, establishing committees to resolve labour disputes and an insurance fund to support workers taking legal action against their employers.
So things on paper looked great. However, the reality on the ground, once they do not get their wages and they try to take their cases to court, they are stuck in a long legal battle, still taking between 3 and 8 months to get a court judgment, and even then the money is not guaranteed at the end, which means many of them either give up hope and go back home with nothing, or stay in Qatar living in dire condition, hoping that this money will come.
An estimated 2 million migrant workers are in Qatar, mostly from South Asia and Africa. Amnesty followed the cases of more than 2,000 migrants working for 3 agencies in the construction and cleaning sectors. The agencies stopped paying wages, citing financial difficulties before ceasing operations and ending their contracts. While some received limited compensation, most of the workers went home with nothing.
They are not paid, they have interest loans back home, which means that they are in debt, They are not paying in Qatar. They struggle. They can't leave. They live in dire conditions in the camp. No food, no water, no electricity.
The Qatari government insists it has made meaningful reforms and claims it has intervened to help migrants settle with their employers. Amnesty says there is an urgent need for more judges to speed up the committee hearings and for the compensation fund to be fully operational. After the World Cup in 2022, the group fears global attention will fall away.
If things are not changing within the maximum next year or so, I think there will not be any more opportunity to change the system.
As the construction projects near completion, Amnesty predicts the largely male migrant workforce could be replaced with female workers for the service and tourism sectors, and they could also be vulnerable to further exploitation. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
President Trump's visit to the UN is being somewhat overshadowed by a controversy surrounding a whistleblower's complaint. The complaint concerns Trump's phone conversation with President Volodymyr Zelensky when he allegedly pressured the Ukrainian leader to investigate the son of Trump's political rival, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden. White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara has the latest.
At the UN General Assembly, President Donald Trump faced scrutiny over his July phone call with President Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump allegedly pressured the Ukrainian leader to investigate Hunter Biden, the son of his political rival, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, over Hunter Biden's business dealings in the country. Trump has admitted discussing with Zelensky what he called corruption concerning the Bidens, but denied wrongdoing regarding what he chose to discuss in that phone call.
What Biden did is a disgrace. What his son did is a disgrace. The son took money from Ukraine. The son took money from China.
The president didn't offer specifics to back up his statement. Candidate Biden pushed back on the campaign trail.
Trump's doing this because he knows I'll beat him like a drum. And he's using the abuse of power and every element of the presidency to try to do something to smear me.
The controversy began last week after reports that an unidentified whistleblower in the national intelligence community came forward, alarmed about the contents of Trump's phone call with a foreign leader. Democrats want access to the whistleblower's information, but the White House is blocking it.
The problem is that that person works in the executive branch, and the head of the executive branch is, of course, the president, and working for the president is the director of national intelligence, who has ordered, it appears, has ordered the Inspector General in National Intelligence to withhold the information from Congress. I expect that we will have a showdown in the courts over this.
Some Democrats are calling for Trump to be impeached and pushing for an investigation into whether the call with Zelensky is linked to the White House decision to temporarily withhold $250 million in military aid to Ukraine. The funds are meant to help Ukraine protect itself from its hostile neighbor, Russia. Beyond domestic politics, there are international implications.
Trump, Biden, and Ukraine is distracting from openings for some sort of diplomatic conclusion to the Ukrainian war, which would be Kiev's #1 priority.
Ukraine has denied being pressured by Washington. Zelensky and Trump are scheduled to meet on the sidelines of UNGA this week. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, the White House.
Tens of thousands of people each year in Africa die or get sick from ingesting counterfeit drugs. But Frank Verzafay, a Cameroonian pharmacist, has developed a device that uses artificial intelligence to determine if a medicine is fake or the real thing. Moki Edwin Kinzeka narrates this report by Anne Nzwankeu in Douala, Cameroon.
Dr. Lionel Nana says he regularly sees patients at this Douala clinic who are still sick because they used counterfeit medicine. That's why he immediately acquired a device when he learned it can determine if a drug is real or fake.
Before, when prescribing the drug did not always give good results. But since we have this device, I can guarantee you that we have been able to improve at least 90% the care of our patients.
Dr. Nana uses TrueSpec, a portable device created by a Cameroonian pharmacist. The user puts the medicine on the device. In less than 10 seconds, The device analyzes the chemical composition of the drug and sends the results back to the connected mobile phone. When it's a good medicine, the device displays the composition of the medication. When it is a fake medicine, the device indicates unknown components. The device has been well received by the College of Pharmacists of Cameroon, especially after the World Health Organization warned of the circulation of fake hypertension drugs in Cameroon and of fake meningitis vaccines in Niger.
It is an application that will help the professionals themselves to ensure the quality of the drugs they ordered, and also the consumers to be able to ensure the quality of the products. So this is an application that is welcome.
TruSpec was named one of the top 30 finalists in the 2019 World Health Organization Innovation Challenge, which recognizes health-oriented innovations to meet Africa's health care needs. For now, the device is available only in Cameroon. TruSpec founder Franz Vezefe says other African countries have already expressed an interest in acquiring it.
The next step would be to make a maximum partnership with African governments to become more involved in the fight against the falsification of drugs and provide a real solution to the problem of Africans, because the African population is the most affected by the problem of the fake medicine.
An EU study last year found that nearly half of all fake or low-quality medicines reported to the World Health Organization were found in sub-Saharan Africa. The report said fake anti-malarial drugs alone lead to more than 64,000 deaths per year. For Anne Zwanke in Douala, Cameroon, Moki, Edwin Kinzeka for VOA News.
The first of 182 people rescued in the Mediterranean Sea disembarked from a humanitarian ship in the Sicilian port of Messina Tuesday. The Ocean Viking arrived in the Sicilian port of Messina with Italy's permission in the morning. A woman and a child were the first off the boat and were greeted by paramedics and Red Cross workers who escorted them onto a waiting ambulance. Another child was also seen being carried off the ship by a vessel crew member. The ship, operated by AIDS group SOS Mediterranean and Doctors Without Borders, rescued the men, women and children from 3 different boats last week after they had set off to Europe from Libya. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a good evening.